Hi folks, welcome back to the Cannabis Corner. I'm your host, Kerry Burns. I've been watching the National Geographic shows on the American weed. They're the growers in Colorado and some of the Oakster Dam project over there with all the medicinal marijuana and some of the growers and stuff. And one of the things that seems to be coming up with a lot of the growers is some of the pests that they're having to deal with. I saw where the one fella had taken his harvest into to the clinic to be sold, and they turned him down because it had spider mites and all. And so tonight I thought we'd talk a little bit about how to control the pests. Now, I've been an organic grower for 25 years, from almost everything I eat to you name it. But one thing I've learned over the years is how to deal with the pests that plague plants, and the cannabis plant's no different than any of the other plants. Pests like to chew on it and the fruits of it, just like they do a lot of the other plants. But there are things that you can do to alleviate about 99% of the problems that you can have with these pests. But the first thing you've got to do is to be diligent. Now, there's a list probably of about 5 or 6 different pests that I would consider to be really damaging that could be damaging to your crop if you're growing, whether it's indoors or outdoors. Outdoors, you stand a little bit better chance because sometimes you can have the predatory insects that will prey on some of these insects that plague the cannabis plant when it's growing. And so having them outdoors can sometimes be a benefit, even though the helicopters and the DEA and whatnot flying overhead probably could spot it a lot easier. But probably at the top of the list of pests is the DEA. Now that's your probably number one primary concern, is to make sure that your grow room or your outdoor grow space is completely protected and invisible to the Drug Enforcement Agency, because of all the pests out there, they're the ones that are going to cause you the most harm and a total eradication of your crop. But going from the least problem to what I consider probably one of the more bigger pests of all, but probably the most common pest that gets into indoors or outdoor grows are little mice or rats and different types of rodents. They love to chew on the leaves. They love chewing on the stems. They'll strip a whole plant. I mean, so of course the most effective way, and of course an organic method, is either the sticky traps or the regular mouse traps or rat traps, depending on what size your rodent is. But so if you see any type of major chewing, then you know for sure you've got a pretty good sized rodent, and the traps need to be set. You can take care of that problem pretty easy. But when we get on the level of the insects, insectivora, and the different things that affect the growth of the cannabis plant and also its maturity at the time when the buds start to set, probably the least damaging and more common of any are the aphids. And these are very visible on top of the plant usually, or you'll see them in the nodes of the leaves and whatnot. And just a simple washing with just water by itself can get rid of these. But I'm going to say this word probably 4 or 5 times during the video, but one of the most important things that you have to do is to be diligent. If you're growing any crops, particularly organic, you need to inspect them quite often and look for signs of insect attack, because some of these critters, if you let them go too far, it'll be almost like the DEA. It'll be almost, you will lose part of your crop, if not all of it. But I would say that the aphids are the least threat. Of course, I don't ever recommend anyone spraying any type of chemical. All of these pests, even though they can be a nuisance and sometimes quite severe, they can all be handled by organic methods, and that's what we're going to talk about. But aphids, very simple matter. You find them on there, you can either mash them with your fingers, wipe them off, or take a water hose and very gently put a jet spray on it and wash them right off. And this is pretty easy to do. A lot of the aphids are put at the top of plants, whether they're cannabis or tomatoes or any type of garden plant. A lot of them are put there by fire ants. Fire ants will actually place the aphids at the tops of these plants and literally farm them. And once their numbers start multiplying, they'll come back and just, it's a round and round venture with them. That's how they get their food and stuff. So if you're in the South and all, particularly, the fire ants can be a big problem. And I'm sure other ant species do this also. But Next up on the list probably would be the spider mites. Now, in one of the videos, I saw the fella, he had his crop turned down because they looked under a microscope and they found traces of the spider mites and all. If the spider mites have gotten into the bud and all, then you really have let this problem go way too far, because this is something that you can nip in the bud, usually literally nip in the bud from the very beginning before the plant ever begins to flower. And if you use a real good organic soil, one with a real good compost mix and a little bit of organic matter and all, usually you'll have the critters in the soil that will take care of these spider mites. They are almost microscopic. They can be seen with a pretty high-powered magnifying glass, but they're very difficult to see, right? But one of the first signs of spider mites on the plant is the lower leaves turning yellow. Then you can actually turn over the bottom side of the leaf, look on the underside, and you can see the matting of the little netting, webbing and whatnot starting to form. Now this is another one you can wash off too, but it's a little bit harder. So, but diligence again is where this is one that you can nip right there at the beginning. If you see the lower leaves, have them on there, take those leaves off and throw them in the trash, burn them, do something, get rid of them. But your soil probably is infected if you get the spider mites. And a lot of these soils that they sell in these home garden centers and whatnot are recycled soils, and a lot of times the mites, being so small and all, they get through this cleaning up phase that a lot of these companies will do to these soils, and then turn around and sell them. They sell them as organic and whatnot, and they're really not. But more than likely your problem originated there. And then as the plants grow and the mites progress up the top of the plant, they get into where the flowers start forming and all. They're so tiny you'll never see them. If once the congestion of the pistillate hairs gets really dense, you can hardly even see the mites. You may see the webbing. If you see the webbing, then it's gotten really severe. But just take the water hose initially and wash those. You can take a little scoop of Vaseline and put it right around the stalk, about 2 or 3 inches above the soil line. This will help a lot in keeping the mites from crawling up the stalk in the beginning. Won't hurt the stalk at all. And the only problem is if it gets real hot and all, it just depends on how hot your grow area is, but some of that may try to melt and soften, so you may have to do that more than once. But it's very effective. Roofing tar works good too, but it's a little bit nastier, and really I wouldn't recommend using that when the Vaseline works so well. But the spider mites, if they've gotten into the buds and all that stage, you've really have not exercised diligence, because you should have had them taken care of long ago. And then when you start doing your clonings, if the mites have already come to the top of the plant, particularly if they've already budding and you're taking clones off of the ones that are already flowering, then you're going to just pass it on to the next one, and they will initially start growing once you get the cuttings going. So this is a problem you have to take care of from the very beginning. And usually if you start out with a really good soil, I mean a really good organic based soil, one that you can pretty much produce yourself, make sure it has lots of good compost, and that way you get the microscopic critters in the soil, and usually those will take care of the spider mites. Outdoors seems to be less of a problem, because there again you have the predatory effect of just being outdoors. But next up on the list though are these little tiny black insects called thrip, and they can be a real problem. Now these are very difficult to detect. You'll usually see them along with the branch where the leaf nodes come out from the branch. They usually like to cluster right in there, and they look like just a bunch of little black dots and all. They're eggs that are laid there by the flying form of this insect. And once they're laid there, they start to multiply, and they can totally, I mean, if the plant itself is very thick and clustered and all, you may miss these because they're very small. So you really need to get in there, look along that stalk real good, up the bracts of where the leaf is attached and all, and up on the underside and all, anywhere in the nodes. If you see those, get the water hose after it, and I mean wash those things out. And it's always best, if you can, to either tilt the pot out where you can actually spray that where the water doesn't drip down into your soil, because a lot of them, like the mites and stuff, if you wash them off and they go right back in the soil, there's a good chance that they're just going to crawl right back up the plant. So kind of set the plant off to the side, not completely laid over, but kind of on an angle. That way the spray of the water is bouncing away from the soil, and you'll prevent that problem from reoccurring, hopefully. But these thrip, they're very bad. They get into the buds and whatnot, and they totally destroy the flavor of it. I believe they even mess with the concentration of the THC even. They are just terrible. and once you get them in there, and if you get a bad case of them, it'll just make you sick. So it's one that you need to be very diligent about, really inspect them real close and wash them. Now next upon the list, and this is one of the most notorious pests I've ever had to deal with growing anything, but particularly on the cannabis plants, they love to get into the nodes, and that's this pink mealybug. And these are hatched from eggs that are laid inside these little nodes and stuff. You can't see them when they're first laid there and all. And I mean, they really cluster up, and they can get into the buds and totally just not only ruin the THC value of it, but also they'll ruin the flavor of the plant. They'll actually make this orange gooish discharge that they have that just gets on there, and it's just a nasty mess. And this is one that if you see one of them, remove it by hand, mash it, and get some type of little tool that you can work in the node and make sure you get that cleaned out real good. Now don't damage the plant now. Make sure that you don't gouge into the plant, even though it probably would recover from it. But get those out of there, because the mealy bugs, they are one that can totally destroy a really good crop of bud. And once they get up in the buds and all, they're invisible. And I mean, when you go to harvest, you'll bust those open and they'll be inside that, and the sight is so nasty, you probably yourself, you won't even think about drying it out and smoking it. And it's definitely one that I think is probably at the top of the list as far as the pest of what you can eat. Now the only other pest that I would say that would be very difficult to, and this is really in an outdoor situation, is a grasshopper, because they love to munch on anything green, and they love eating the buds. They'll eat all that, and they seem to be insensitive to the THC and all. I don't know if they are or not, but they certainly love to chew on them. And of course these, you're just going to have to catch them and pull their little heads off. And of course, if you have an indoor grow, there's probably a good chance that you're not being plagued by grasshoppers. But the mealybugs, the thrips, those are the two at the top that you really want to make sure that you exercise a very thorough inspection fairly routinely, particularly right at the time, right before they start to bloom and all, because this is when you'll start to see these insects. And grow organically. You don't have to use a bunch of stupid chemicals. You don't have to use a bunch of industrial pesticides or any type of fertilizers that are granular or anything like that. Mix up you a good compost of several different manures. Get some rotting leaf mold. All those types of things contain the insects and the lower orders of insects that feed on these predatory insects, and you'll have a much better success. And whatever you do, if you are doing cloning, you can take the clone and wash it and give it a bath. Scrub it even if you have to with a light sponge. It won't hurt it if you're gentle enough. But get that stuff off there before you stick those clones, because if you don't, you're going to have just as big a problem as you see once the plants get mature. And I thank you for joining the Cannabis Corner.